ChatGPT Plus is free for college students through May. Here's the thing. You've got a lot to do between now and then. Studying for finals, writing papers, trying to keep your life on track, and ChatGPT can help with all of it. It can quiz you for your econ exam, make a study guide from your French notes, plan out your meals and study breaks. It can get really specific on how you like to learn. It can even help you come up with ways to stop procrastinating. So from now until summer break, take advantage of all the ways ChatGPT can make your life easier. Restrictions apply.
Hank's the family fixer, always with his tool belt. But living with prostate cancer, he needed help. He asked his doctor about Xtandi and enzalutamide. Xtandi 40 milligram tablets treats men with prostate cancer that has spread to other parts of the body and responds to a medical or surgical treatment to lower testosterone. Xtandi may cause serious side effects: seizure, a brain condition called PRESS, allergic reactions, heart disease that can lead to death, falls and bone fractures, swallowing problems, or choking that can lead to death. Stop Xtandi and get medical help at once if your face, tongue, lip, or throat start swelling. Tell your doctor at once if you faint, have a seizure, quickly worsening headache, decreased alertness, confusion, vision problems, chest pain or discomfort, or shortness of breath. Xtandi can cause harm to an unborn baby or miscarriage. Use birth control during and 3 months after Xtandi. Common side effects include muscle and joint pain, feeling unusually tired, hot flashes, constipation, less appetite, diarrhea, high blood pressure, bleeding, falls, fractures, and headache. Talk to your doctor and visit Xtandi.com.
As we've continued to build the Coaching Coordinator Podcast Network, I've really been excited about this series that we've really been planning here for since the beginning of the year. Certainly have known about our host for a long time here. He's been on the podcast before as part of our Passing Lab series, and we're excited to have Bobby Peters leading the efforts behind the Alert the Post podcast. Bobby, first of all, thank you for taking the time and hosting this series, and thank you for being here today.
Of course. No, when you approached me, I was real excited. Definitely had some people in mind I wanted to talk to. Definitely had some questions that were starting to form, through my off-season studies here. So great opportunity to talk and grow the game.
And for our listeners, if they haven't heard you on Josh's podcast, I'll make sure we link that one in there. You definitely want to check that one out. But you really have a unique place in the football space, and the things that you do, I think that both serve the football community with the things you put out on your Substack, the books that you create. But I know it's serving you well as a coach. Would love to hear just how all of this came about for you. How did this start and what has it led to?
Yeah, no, when I first started coaching, when I graduated college, obviously, most coaches, right? You're a tape junkie. You're just trying to find as much tape you can, try to, find cool concepts and learn that way. And as I was doing that, my first couple years, before I started calling like sophomore and JV offenses, probably my second and third year coaching, I was like, this is great. I'm finding these plays, but I'm really not getting as much out of this as I wanted. So at that point, I started doing like full season breakdowns of like some NFL teams, just because, NFL Game Pass was a thing then. And, I had access to the tape. So that's kind of where that started. And then someone along the line, was like, hey, you got enough to write a book here. And I go, that thought never even crossed my mind. And then, I was kind of looking into it, and, a few things happened. And, I wrote a couple of early editions of the Complete Offensive Manual that I usually don't like talking about just because they're very rudimentary at this point. But the first one that I did that was a real serious endeavor as far as like the quality was concerned, upgrading my diagrams, was the 2019 49ers. And that one was like pushing 350 pages. And, if we all think back to that season for them, it was, they were incredibly efficient that year, and they really broke onto the scene doing a lot of cool things on offense. So that's kind of how it all started. And then for every offseason, I just wanted to continue to grow and watch other teams and continue to watch the Niners to Everett, a few more on them. But that's kind of how it started. And it's like you alluded to a little bit, it's great for me personally too, because it forces me to do the work, right? As a coach, obviously it's good to read resources and to watch tape, but when you're putting in the amount of time it takes to write these books and the amount of analysis and thought that you have to put into them, it's forcing you to learn it, just as, better than anybody. So that's been the benefit for me as far as my coaching side of it is concerned.
Yeah, and I mean, there are some people out there who basically are able to somehow get access to playbooks, and they utilize that, which isn't necessarily your own work. What's your process? I'm sure, with the NFL Game Pass, you're sitting there, are you padding? Like, how does this all work for you as far as your work process to get all this done?
Sure. Let me touch on that first point that you talked about, like with the playbooks. As time goes on, you can get your hands on, especially through the internet, through Twitter and networking. You can find older copies, newer copies of NFL playbooks, college playbooks. If you dig hard enough, you can find whatever you're looking for nowadays. But what I have found, especially as I've come across some of the teams that I've studied, is the playbooks themselves lack context, right? You got these diagrams against different fronts. You might not know what some of their terminology means as far as like their offensive line terminology or the different route adjustments for the receivers. And what I aim to do with my books is to build on that. I don't want it to be just a playbook. I want it to be, they like this concept against these looks. They don't like it against these looks. How did it work for them during the season? How didn't it? How does this concept fit into the overall, break it down, right? Because when you see it in a playbook, it doesn't tell you what the concept does, right? It's just like, okay, this is what it's called. These are the routes, right? What is it? And I try to aim and I try to add a layer on top of a playbook, right? Make it a little bit more comprehensive. And then to your second point, what I do is I'll clip, especially for the offensive manuals, what I do is I'll clip every single clip from the season, right? So then I've got this database of clips and I kind of match it to Excel, like down distance, which week it was, so I can make the tables for the books too. And then from there, I sit down and I write them by concept, right? So I just, search, by concept, watch all the clips together, describe what it is, and then break down why it worked and why it didn't for that specific team.
And as far as the drawing goes, that's all you as well, right? What are you using to do the drawings?
Yeah, Just Play reached out to me. So that was kind of the upgrade when I referenced earlier. The upgrade to the diagrams was when I partnered with Just Play for the diagrams. And they have made my books look 10 times better than what they were before, if not 20 times better. And their product is really easy to use too. So anytime anybody asks me what I use for them or what product I like, I recommend them without hesitating because it's been awesome for me.
Yeah, they've done a great job with their product. I was involved with them in the early days and certainly continue to keep contact with. I really like what they have as a tool. The analysis that goes into it, I think you made a very important point, because we do see all these clips and we see plays and we see diagrams and we fall in love with things. But I think what you said is very important, that the game is played in context, that what's happening within there. And seeing you've recorded some of your shows, so seeing some of these early shows, that's a big part of it. And thinking of the situations and what happened and why did it work, all that is tied together. The game is always played in context.
Yeah, exactly. No, then that's, obviously when you talk to coaches too, especially with these interviews that we have, and especially the ones I've done so far and the ones upcoming too, is let's take those books, but let's go another step further, right? Let's kind of get into the why of why those teams have done certain things. I think that's obviously incredibly valuable. And I think that's what really, because you can find playbooks and a lot of playbooks end up saying the same stuff, right? You see the same diagrams, you see the same concepts, but there's so much more nuance to it that I try to cover obviously in these interviews, but then also in the books too.
So for our audience, what can they expect from the Alert the Post podcast?
So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to, find a concise set of questions to keep the interview to about 20 minutes for each specific guest as far as what I'm interested in learning from them. Things that, whether it be, a college or an NFL coach that, you've watched their games and you know what their offense is all about and you want to try to take it to that next level and try to understand what they're exactly doing and thinking behind certain things. And then even for high school coaches, Mike Fitzgerald is one of the guys I interviewed first and is probably one of the first ones to come out here. And he's the guy that I have immense respect for, and his process behind things and the thought that he puts into every detail of his program and his offense has struck me as one of the highest levels that I've come across. So just basically things that I've been pondering and things that I've been wanting to study and ask guys about, I try to, bring it to a larger audience.
Now you're a high school coach and, you will be talking to NFL coaches, college coaches, talking to high school coaches on this series. But your studies involve obviously high-level NFL teams. Talking to 49ers, there's a huge 49ers tree, right? Which you know all about. The belief that I hear floated out there all the time is, well, that stuff works at the pro level. I can't do it. You're a high school coach. You use this. You're learning. What are your thoughts on that? How does this apply really to everybody, no matter what level of the game they're at?
I can't even tell you how big of an influence studying the NFL game has had on me as a coach. I think taking a step back, right? You look at the NFL, there's so much parity because teams can draft, the bad teams draft at the top of the draft every year. You get access to better players, free agency, right? Ideally, the talent should be as close as it should be at any level of the game. And that's relatively true. The games often come down to coaching adjustments, little things here and there, right? And I think that's where you see a lot of the separation as far as quality of coaching, right? I think even high school, college, some of the elite programs, they can just show up and play well and win just because they're more talented than the other team. Obviously, there's more to it. I'm being a little glib when I say that, of course, but I think there's a level of truth to it, and I think that's why studying the NFL game, even though obviously the hash marks being different is a huge difference, and probably the biggest difference. But when we're talking like, oh, that might not work because it's a talent issue or they have more time, I could disagree with that more, because there's been specific concepts, run game, pass game, play action, screens that I've taken at the high school level and had success with too.
Yeah, and I know coaches do pay attention to this at the high school level. I think I shared with you before, was visiting Dub Maddox at Union High School, going to his office, and there's a stack of Bobby Peters books. He's got them all, right? So, and loves them and learns from them. And I can't recommend it as a resource enough. And yes, it is the NFL, but the way that Bobby breaks it down, as he said, really gives you some insight into it, and definitely a deep thinker on the game. We're excited, Bobby, to have you here for this. Appreciate the time and effort that you're putting into it. And I know our listeners are going to love this as well. So thank you.
Of course, Keith, excited to keep this thing rolling.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon Business. How can you free up your team from time-consuming office tasks? Amazon Business empowers leaders to not only streamline purchasing, but better support their teams so they can focus on strategy and growth. Free up your teams and focus on your future. Learn more about the technology, insights, and support available at amazonbusiness.com.
All right, so we're live here. This is the first episode of Alert the Post podcast, part of the larger Coach and Coordinator Podcast Network. My name is Bobby Peters. I'm your host of Alert the Post. And for my first guest, I wanted to bring on one of my good friends, Mike Fitzgerald. Mike is currently the head coach at Marist High School here in Illinois. Mike has coached now, how many years now?
I think this was my 21st season.
Yeah, so he's been an offensive coordinator. He's been a head coach now for a while at some of the more successful programs in Illinois. And when I got asked by you to do this podcast, he was one of the first people that popped in my head. So I immediately started thinking of some questions. So we'll just roll right into this. So one question that I want to talk about is, when you're game planning, what are some points of emphasis? Because everybody game plans differently, and there's 100 different directions you can go with it. And I love hearing coaches tell me like which avenues or like which things they look at first. So what are your points of emphasis when game planning, and how has that evolved too over the last 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, for sure. First off, thanks for having me. Honored to be on the show. Big fan of the Coach and Coordinator podcast, and obviously love talking football with you. So it's good to be on here. Watched a lot of these episodes. But yeah, game planning, I think the Dub Maddox and the R4 stuff, I read that as a younger coach, and that was very influential for me, just in terms of what stuck with me is the storyboard and the rhythm and the read and the release and the rush and all that stuff. I do it a little differently, but the whole idea of having your base play and then always having that counter punch. So I think it's important to anticipate, how the defense might adjust. And, hopefully you never even have to really get to that. Your base stuff is good and it's working, and your players are better than their players. And, you got them out schemed, but, against the good teams, they're going to come up with something, and you got to be proactive in terms of, okay, what's our adjustment before it happens? You don't want to be scrambling on the sideline. You want to already have practice that. So I think that's something that's really important. I also think the situational piece, that book that Brian Billick wrote was pretty influential in my development, reading that. And then I went back and looked at all of my numbers and how many times we were in 1st and 10 and 2nd and 8 and 2nd and long and 3rd and medium and backed up. And it's like, wow, it's pretty similar every year. And, are we practicing, the situations that we're seeing at that same percentage? I think those are things that have really influenced me and are really important. I also think like over time, I think one of the hardest things is, when you meet with coaches, everybody has great ideas. And as the offensive coordinator, they throw all this stuff on your lap and then they kind of go to bed and you're thinking, okay, how am I going to get ready for Monday? I think you got to obviously have a way to delegate duties to your coaches and get their input, but you also got to realistically say, okay, there's a lot of good plays out there, but what are the ones I'm actually going to call? Because those are the ones we need to practice. And, there's things that might make my call sheet, but if we never practice it, obviously we're never calling it and it gets scratched off. And so I think that's something that's been really good for us. We also, we never meet on the weekends in person. It's all virtual. And, I found this from somebody and kind of tweaked it into my own, but every coach is responsible for, a certain scouting position. So you have one coach looking at the DBs, do they line up field and boundary? Do they line up who's stronger against the run? Who's weaker against the pass? Another guy's looking at the linebackers. Another guy's looking at the D-line. And then you have guys also being experts kind of on situations. So that's been really good. So when we meet virtually, all that stuff's already in a spreadsheet. I've already read their comments, and that makes our meeting go a lot more efficiently and put that game plan together on Sunday a little smoother than just sitting there and throwing ideas on the board, which I did probably when I first got into coaching. So those are some of the things, strategies in terms of how it's evolved for me.
Yeah, I think two things that I've taken from you, and then also like that just make a ton of sense, are definitely the R4 stuff with Dub. I think that provides such a simple framework, and it provides like an if-then type sequencing, right? Like it gives you answers for like pragmatic answers for like what the defense is doing to your base stuff, right? You have your stuff you hang your hat on, and then you have your different branches off that. And then also too, like you talked about getting real specific with the assignments for assistants, having them help with certain aspects of the game plan and defining that and giving them, that can really save time too, right? Like, coaches have a lot of things that are taking up their time, right? Jobs, kids, all that good stuff, family commitments on the weekends. So getting as specific as you can and really save their time, but also it gives you as the play caller the information that you need at the same time. So those are the two things that really stuck out to me there. Something that's really the rabbit hole that I've been going down the last probably like month or so, and this all started with working on the Commanders book and studying Cliff Kingsbury's offense and even to a degree to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and how great their screen game was this past year. Screens are, as coaches, we can always hand the ball off to a great running back, right? The quarterback has the ball in his hands every single play, but sometimes it's hard to find ways to get receivers the ball, to get easy touches, get them the ball in space. The best offenses, whether it be NFL, college, or high school, have solid screens that they can rely on, hang their hat on. Some screens, and you've been fantastic with screens over the years too. When we worked together, a few years ago, and then even as you continue to grow your screen inventory. One thing that I want to talk about specifically with receiver screens are separate the difference between a tunnel screen and a middle screen, kind of how you see it. And then I know that tunnel screens have been great for you over the years. So maybe give us a coaching point or two, because screens are a more nuanced element of offensive football too, right? Like there's a lot of important coaching points. You have to really hammer the details. And a lot of teams, have a hard time practicing them too. So it's teams that are good at them are usually well coached in all other areas of offense too.
Yeah, I see stuff on social media with the tunnel screen, and I kind of define it a little differently than maybe some coaches. For me, the tunnel screen is, you're catching the ball and then you're getting back to the sideline, where some people call a tunnel screen, you're getting all the way to the middle of the field. For me, those are two different screens. So the tunnel screen for me, I'm getting back to the sideline. Middle screen, my receiver is going to bring it all the way to the middle of the field, and the linemen are essentially creating like a wedge block up the middle of the field. Some certain coaching points for the tunnel screen that I'm talking about. I think first and foremost, you really got to work with the guys releasing on the screens. They have to understand, just like you teach a receiver on a release, their release is different based off the technique. So that tackle, if he has a five technique, I want him to step into the line. I want him kind of shorten the edge. I want to throw him by, and then he has to go flat. That's a major coaching point. If he goes up the field 1 yard, that could be the difference between a big play and our guy getting stuck at the line of scrimmage. So he's got to go flat so he's in a position to make a great block. Otherwise, he's probably going to miss the block against a good defense, or he's going to be in a position to block him in the back. If he's got a 4 technique, we're going to actually set outside and try and bait him to go inside so we get a little cleaner release. And I think that's an important piece too that you got to work on. You got to show them that different things. Another hard one is when you have like a 4 and he slants inside and then they bring edge pressure. We want our guys to set on the edge pressure for a second to slow him down. If we get our hands on him, great. If not, we're going to be able to get underneath them and get into that alley for that kick out block. But I think those are some of the major coaching points, and they can't get depth when they, like I said, they got to step into the line of scrimmage, because if they get depth, they're going to get pinned, and that receiver's relying on that tackle to get out there. So I think that's from the lineman piece is really important. And, we actually do a lot of our screen stuff against the coaches. I might have an in rush upfield, but to do it against a scout team, sometimes you don't get a great look and you start running bad angles and whatnot. So we really do it on air and against the coaches to make sure we're giving them what we want to see. And then I think the other crucial thing is finding the right receiver. I think that's one of the toughest catches in football, where you're coming into the quarterback. It's a short throw there, so there's going to be some zip on it. You're going to have to catch it in traffic. You're going to have to feel the tackle. You got to get inside that tackle. And then the next puller, you got to be able to read his block as well. And you might be getting to the sideline right away, or you might be getting another kick out and then get to the sideline. So it might not be your best receiver sometimes. You got to find the guy who's got a feel for it, who's got great hands. But yeah, it's definitely a great football play. I always say, even when it doesn't work, I've boosted my quarterback's confidence. He's got a completion, and I've also made the defense, run sideline to sideline. So they got to cover some ground and hopefully tire him out a little. So great play, great football play. And it's great to see so many different wrinkles to it now with, guys pulling, people doing it off a GT, people doing it off a counter. So we've gotten into that a little too, and it's been great.
Yeah, no, that's all good stuff. I think, especially studying NFL tape, like, when you study screens and the teams that are good at them, it's amazing how consistent the successful clips are where the running back and the offensive line have a strong relationship for the landmark, right? So like, most NFL teams, if the ball's on the left hash, the landmark for a screen to the wide side of the field will be like 2 yards outside the hash. And it's amazing how consistent, like if a kick out block takes place right there at that landmark and the running back stops and stays just inside that first kick out block or receiver, whatever type of screen you're running. It's amazing how consistent that is for success, right? And, if you've got your receiver, going too far inside or he stays outside the landmark and your tackle can't get to the landmark, then you're in trouble. So that's something that I've seen that's been super consistent with that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you said that because I actually went back through like 4 years of those screens looking at what the optimal point is. For example, into the boundary, I kind of found middle of the numbers to top of the numbers is kind of the ideal sweet spot. If you get further inside, it's usually not good. And if you get stuck too far outside, and again, it could be a half yard, but again, in that play, that could be the difference between a big play and a no gain.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Another general topic that I've been tossing around for a few years, and this has kind of been driven by the different quarterbacks that I've coached and how different that they are and how they think and see the game. Quarterback reads. Pure progressions have become very popular, especially in the NFL. And I think then it kind of trickles down to some degree to college and high school where everything is kind of like a 1, 2, 3, 4. You're kind of reading the defense across the board and you're reading, space on the field or receivers, versus coverage, right? It's less coverage recognition. It's more just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, versus coverage reads where you're reading maybe safety rotation or, pre-snap, you're picking a side based on a look that you're getting. So I want to hear your journey with this. So you've had a strong passing attack throughout your entire career and, you haven't done the same thing. You weren't doing the same thing 5 years ago that you were doing 2 years ago versus 10 years ago. So talk to me about your journey, kind of how the pure progression mindset has fit into that and where you kind of stand with that today.
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, you were the guy to kind of turn me on to that when we worked together. I was really successful with the dual routes, single high go here, two high go here, kind of pick a side with the quarterback. And, we were really successful with that. My first stint at Marist as the offensive coordinator, we were scoring all kinds of points, a lot of yards, and that was kind of how we did things. But I will say the defenses have gotten so much better. I mean, so complex that reading coverages has become very difficult. So the pure progressions for me, the best part about it is I don't have to be exact on what coverage they're in. My quarterback doesn't have to exactly know, are they single high, are they two high? They know where they're going to start the read. And you can do a lot of different things. The whole idea of a front side concept and a backside concept, and that backside concept has to come into your vision. But I think given the quarterback where to start is a huge plus for him. He can play more confident. He's not going to be paralysis by analysis, trying to figure out what the coverage is. He can kind of just get to that first read. For instance, if you have smash on the front side, his eyes are on that corner. If the corner bails, you're going to drive that hitch in there. If he drives on the hitch, you're looking at the corner route behind him, and there's no doubt where he's starting to play. And by his eyes, he doesn't have to honestly look anybody off, because as he's looking at that smash concept, he's automatically moving the backside of the defense to that smash concept and opening up the backside routes for them to find windows. So it comes naturally into his vision. And I'm a creature of habit, so it took me some time to really buy into it and believe in it. But then I started to see, how comfortable a quarterback was and how fast he was playing. And honestly, it made me comfortable because I didn't have to be right. I feel like it made me a better coach because, I knew where my quarterback was going to start. I knew it was good versus everything if we run it right. And it was more about our execution. The pure progression stuff has been really good. And I feel like every year we add some wrinkles to it, whether it's a different frontside concept or backside concept. And that's the nice thing too, is the quarterback, it's the same read for him. Nothing really changes. It's just different guys getting to different spots.
Have there been any drawbacks with it? Have you been in a situation, whether it be practice or a game, where, you're like, oh man, if we had a coverage read on here, I'd get his eyes to the other side of the field sooner? Has there been a specific moment or a specific concept where you're like, man, I wish we had taught this kind of the old way, or what have you seen on that side of it?
No, I mean, honestly, I gave a clinic talk at the Glacier in February, and one of the questions was, well, do you ever get to the backside concept? And hopefully I never do. I want to be able to read the one guy and get the ball out. But yeah, there's times that I do get to the backside concept and I complete the ball and move the chains, but there's other times I don't, because the protection does have to hold up longer. but at least my quarterback knows where that guy's going to be and gives us a chance. And honestly, the scrambles off of that, I feel like are better too, because guys are going a certain way and then they reverse the other way and everybody's kind of in unison. I think the other thing sometimes where we get stuck is depending on the concept, if we don't have an effective answer versus man. So we've done a few things with those routes that we're worried about, where we'll have like a side adjustment for one guy and they'll communicate a call to the quarterback and we'll change the route based off of that. So that's helped us get out of some of those situations. But no, for the most part, I mean, the strengths have definitely outweighed, any of the negatives.
Nice. All right. So what's one big picture lesson that you learned last year?
Yeah. So this was year one for me at Marist High School. Prior to that, I was at York High School for 6 years and turned that program around. And, I think what a good lesson was starting over, from year one, the importance of alignment through your whole program. At York, I left at a point where the freshmen, the sophomores, and the varsity were all running the same thing. They were all hearing the same coaching points. They were all getting the same details and everything was perfectly aligned, and that takes time. And it was just a fresh reminder of how powerful that is, if you take the time to get your coaches on the same page. And the guys at Marist were unbelievable for year one. They did a great job on all the levels, but I'm just saying the power of the kids going through it for 4 years, it does make a difference just in terms of how fast you can get things in and, kind of slowed us down in the summer in terms of our install because some things were new. Luckily, I'd been at Marist in the past and some of the stuff was still pretty similar to when I left, and the base of the offense was pretty similar. So I felt like we were able to get going pretty quick. But I think that's the challenge for any coach. I feel like as a coach, every year you get smarter, but you got to remember those kids are still in year one. So, for me, it might be year 22, but for some of those kids, it's year one. So you always got to go back to the basics and go from there and layer it on from that point. So I think it was just a great lesson, again, to reiterate the importance of alignment.
Now, similar to the game planning question, during the week, the scheduling, kind of laying out a practice plan for the week. Coaches can do it a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different strategies, thoughts on how to prepare for a game during the week. What are your favorite practice elements for each week during the season?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, you got to film practice. You got to catch the mistakes when they happen. There's no better feeling for me when we make a mistake in practice, we correct it, and that same situation happens in the game and it's like, we already nailed that. You know what I mean? So that's what practice is for. I get excited about mistakes. We learn from mistakes. Got to have a growth mindset. I think the other important thing is practicing situations. So we do our one-on-one stuff with situations and we have situational competitions to start practice, get them juiced up, get them amped up. And it's been great for us. It's ones versus ones. We're not worried about, a scout team or anything like that. So for instance, we'll have a third down challenge. It's 3rd and 2, 3rd and 4, 3rd and 6, 3rd and 8, 3rd and 10, and it's best of 5. So, if the defense stops us 3 times, they win. If the offense gets 3 first downs, they win. We also do a 2nd and 8 scrimmage. We put the ball down, it's 2nd and 8. If we get 4 yards, it's 3rd and 4. We got to get the first down. If we get the first down, it automatically goes to a short yardage situation, so we can work that in. But you can rip off a bunch of plays in that 2nd and 8 scrimmage in 5-10 minutes. You're getting your ones in for a series, your twos in, your ones in, your twos in. We'll do obviously 2-minute, we'll do red zone competitions. We do a short yardage competition where, it's 4th and 1 on the 31. If you get the first down, it's 4th and 1 on the 21. If you get the first down, it's 4th and 1 on the 11. If you get it again, you get a chance to score. It's 4th and goal on the 1. So that's a pretty physical period that we'll do every now and then. Just make sure that we're good in those situations. Overtime we practice. There was a time at York, we had really large numbers. We actually had our first O with our second D and then our first D with our second O, and we were on separate sidelines and we played overtime and it went to about 5 or 6 overtimes. And it was super competitive. Guys weren't talking to each other afterwards. They were so pissed off. But it really was game-like. And then a couple weeks later, we got in a huge overtime game and our guys just lit up. They had the confidence. They knew they were going to win that game. And we beat a really good football team in week 4 that year, just a couple weeks after we practiced that. So I feel like situations are a good time to do it. I feel like we do a really good job with that, get our kids prepared for that. And it's fun. You know what I mean? And that's where you get your ones-on-ones and you kind of start game planning for the defense each week. Like, hey, we got a new wrinkle. We want to show them, catch them off guard. They're kind of getting used to our stuff. They bring a new blitz to us or new coverage. So the kids get into it. And honestly, those situations is where you're going to see the most volatility in the game anyways, where that scout look is going to be a little different. There's going to be an element of disguise with the good football team. So it really helps prepare you. And again, you learn a lot. Like you make a poor decision in the red zone, and you get to remind the quarterback, hey, we need points here. You know what I mean? You take a sack in 2 minutes, like, hey, we got to stop the clock. We got to get the ball out of bounds. But you got to practice those situations before they happen. You got to make those mistakes so you can learn from them.
No, that's all great stuff. And I think, just generally speaking, I don't think you can practice too much situational football. I think there's always room to fit that in more into practice plans and during the week. And like you said, it's fun for the kids, right? There's only so many 1st and 10s, line the ball up on the 40 going in type of stuff you can do. But, when you make it 3rd down, or when you make it, a 4th and 1, or, all the different situations you talked about, the energy level just rises through the roof. Cliff Kingsbury built an impressive system for rookie Jaden Daniels to thrive in this past season. When I put on a couple of their games over the winter, I decided that I had to do a manual on them. The Washington Commanders were one of the top offenses in the NFL last year, propelled by an impressive rushing attack. They utilized almost every concept in the playbook, using tags and weekly adjustments to keep defenses guessing all year. They incorporated RPOs to complement their run game where it made sense. In the past game, they focused on finding matchups for Daniels to exploit, both down the field and with quick hitters. Cliff and company did a great job of finding concepts for the defenses they were playing to get the ball out of Daniels' hands at the top of his drop. One of my favorite sections to work on was the section on tunnel screens, watching all the different variations that Cliff and company designed and how Washington executed them throughout the season were a lot of fun to study. Tunnel screens are a great way to get receivers the ball in space for easy touches in the pass game. You can find my entire book, my 300-page full complete offensive manual on Amazon by searching the 2024 Washington Commanders Complete Offensive Manual. So another concept that, I think you're catching a theme here. We're talking about a lot of stuff that people do differently. And, successful people have a rhyme and a reason why they do certain things a certain way. And one of these concepts is 4 verticals. There's so many different coaching trees, run it differently. They coach it differently. The routes are taught differently. They run it out of different formations, drop back, play action, whatever, they coach the check down differently. What have you done over the years? Kind of what was your starting point? Where have you gotten to? You can kind of fill in as many of the gaps as you want with it. But I'm real curious to hear how you're coaching that up these days.
Yeah, starting out with 4 verts, it was always, seam to check down type deal. You're trying to rip that seam in there. Over time, I feel like that's just really difficult to do. A lot of defenses too are matching those verticals. And it's an expensive play, in my opinion, if you're going to try and rep that and get that in there in those seams. So what we've done more with 4 verticals, like if we call it, our quarterback knows we're probably just going to the outside guy. You're going to get one-on-one in the outside, whether it's cover 3 or cover 4, you're still probably going to get a man-to-man look. Or we're going to do it out of trips, 3-by-1, and we're going to read the weak safety. If he goes to double the X, it's kind of like a pure progression. We're going to read it left to right. If he stays on the hash, then we're going to throw it to the X down the sideline. We also, if we're trying to attack the seam, we're probably just going to do it kind of on one side. So we'll have like a vertical switch concept on one side, and the other side might be like a hitch and a slot fade. So, if you got an easy hitch, the quarterback can take that. If it's man, he can throw the slot fade. Otherwise, we're going to work that vertical switch combination. It'll adjust first coverage. It'll try and find an empty, an open window there. But that's kind of how we're going to attack the seam if we want to go after the seams. Otherwise, if we're calling 4 verticals, we're probably just honestly going to the outside. And it's, like I said, it's easier to teach. You're not spending too much time trying to figure out seam. Is he bending? Is he not bending? All those things.
Yeah, I think what kind of put this question in the front of my head the other day was, doing all the different NFL studies. NFL teams aren't huge into 4 verts. They just, for whatever reason, aren't. But I was going back and looking at some of my old 2020 Raiders tape back when John Gruden was the head coach there. And they were a really good 4 vertical team. And they ran it a bunch of different ways. And, you switch verticals, different check down distributions. And, I was watching the Gruden QB camp, the new iteration that he put out this past year. And I can't remember which quarterback he was talking to, but he basically, I'm sure it was an exaggeration, but you get the point. He was saying how the check down should get the ball about 70% of the time on 4 verticals. And that one really stuck to me, because it's like, if the coverage, properly distributes and the defense kind of matches everything down the field, your check down should be your answer, right? So I think putting a lot of thought into the check down is something that coaches of all levels can take from. Another thing too that I've noticed, and especially right now I'm working, studying the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense from last year with Liam Cohen, and even some of the other teams I've studied recently too, is like with Cliff Kingsbury with the Commanders, they ran a ton of different auxiliary runs to complement their base runs. They do a few different things for the offense. You're looking for explosive plays, right? You're looking to take advantage of a defense doing one thing and try to create an explosive, whether it be like a trap concept or like a different type of toss play. You're getting the ball to the edge that the defense is playing on one of your tendencies, and then you're gonna break that tendency with one of these types of play calls. And the other thing too is it slows them down when you're running your base stuff as well. So just curious, something over the years, recently an auxiliary run that's been successful for you and that you've liked to incorporate within your offense.
Yeah, we always have a few wrinkles in terms of that. We've done some stuff with the pin and pull. One thing that was good for us last year was the old tackle ISO tackle dart play. I used to run that play a ton and I loved it. You get the tackle pulling on a linebacker and, instead of maybe an undersized fullback, and you can do it more out of spread. So that was something that was good for us. And I kind of got away from it. The last team I coached for, we saw a lot of 3-3 stack, and it isn't good versus the stack. And this new league I'm in, it's more 4-man front, odd front. And now the angles are a lot better for that play. So that kind of came back into existence for me. And it's kind of an auxiliary run just because we didn't probably run it as much as inside zone or power or counter. But we got some mileage out of that. The other thing we did a lot with just, quarterback draw. That's something we did a lot with quarterback draw, and we tied in quarterback draw with our power and counter blocking as well. So that was kind of a variation off of, power and counter that was really good for us. And, we tie in some RPOs with that and try and put guys into conflict. And, you can get really creative with the formations and different ways to do that. So that was good for us as well.
No, that's all good stuff. And like I was saying, talking about the Commanders and Cliff Kingsbury, they both dart and draw. They did a really good job of, formationing it to create leverage and numbers, but also incorporating RPOs to help protect the concept too, kind of what you're talking about. I think, especially with auxiliary runs, you're looking to take advantage of certain things, right? But at the same time, you're also looking for complementary plays. And when you're building that, you have to keep in mind, all the different, ways to protect it too. So I think that's all good stuff, the ways that you protect it too. All right, last question I wanted to hit on. This is something that I always think about, and I lean a certain way on this, maybe against the grain a little bit, but gut play calls versus scripted play calls, right? We all practice, we all have, our third down sections, our short yardage sections, all this different stuff on our call sheet. But once you get into the game, things change quickly, right? Your quarterback might be having a bad day. Say his girlfriend dumped him last night, or you get one of your offensive linemen, failed a test during school or something, and he's having a rough day. Things change, and you got to adapt quickly in a game. I'd love to hear an example of a gut play call that maybe wasn't a point of emphasis during the week. Maybe it was buried on the game plan, or something that something happened, whether it be an assistant coach suggesting something to you during a game recently, or something that a player suggested to you, or just something that like, a nice story about a gut play call about, wasn't necessarily like scripted on your call sheet, like we need to call this here.
Yeah, I actually got two thoughts that come to my mind with this question that kind of tie into some things that we talked about earlier. So the first thing in terms of a play call that saved us this year, we were playing our big rival down the road, Brother Rice, and they had just scored and we needed to go down the field to tie it up. And it was a 2-minute situation. And I called a play that we had never called before. And that's like the cardinal rule. Don't call something you've never practiced. Now, we had practiced elements of it, and going back to the pure progression stuff, I just called a different concept on the front side that we have never called before. But the quarterback knew that was the front side concept. And so he knew where to go. He knew what I was thinking. He knew where his eyes should be. And we ended up scoring a touchdown off that play. But it's something that we never really paired. Like, we'd worked the concepts individually, but we'd never paired it that way, if that makes sense. But since it was in that pure progression family, he knew exactly where to start, where his eyes were, and the kids executed it perfectly. So that was huge, something that saved us, that, we'd kind of set him up with it a few plays, prior to that. And then I was like, this is going to work. And it did, and sometimes it doesn't always work that way, but I felt confident because we'd worked the pieces. It wasn't completely something brand new, but just the way we paired it. And another thought that comes to mind with that stuff comes up a lot. And going back to the practice element, 7-on-7, we probably have way too many plays on 7-on-7 each week, but my thing with that is banking reps. And I hope I don't have to use all those passing plays. I hope we have the game under control where we can run the ball, we can be efficient, we can take our shots, and we're not in this, drop back passing game all game. But I know those banked reps, sometimes you do get behind in a game and you do have to be able to be throwing the ball maybe a little more than you want to. And banking those reps throughout the season really pays off. And so we probably do a lot of stuff in 7-on-7 that we might not call on Friday. And people might think that's a waste of time if they really looked at, practice versus what was called in the game. But 3 weeks down the line, this defense does something different. It's like, hey, we've worked that. we banked those reps 3 weeks ago. Our kids know this. We can adjust to this on the sideline. I think it's really beneficial where you can get off script and you can go to something like you're saying. So again, I think it comes back to the practice. I was reminded of that when you asked the question. So, I think that's really valuable of maybe you're not using it in the game, but you're still banking those reps, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it really does. Mike, we got to wrap up here, but first, I want to thank you a ton, especially being the guinea pig for this podcast. So I appreciate you working with me on this and loved your answers, loved the discussion, and good luck to you this year.
Yeah, no, really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to Alert the Post on the Coaching Coordinator Network. If you want more Alert the Post content, check me out on X at B_Peters12. Or for more long-form content, check out my Substack at alertthepost.com. There you'll find weekly articles, sections from my books, full complete season breakdowns, and at least once a week, I post a full season cut-up for subscribers on alertthepost.com.